Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 11, Day 6. Today's journal: what is the fear of the American government during this time? What is the American response to this fear, and who in America responded to this fear? Okay, so we talked a little bit about McCarthyism yesterday. Those should be some of the things that you're going over. Now, these notes are going to be on Eisenhower's presidency. Okay, so Dwight D. Eisenhower is going to take over for Truman, and he's going to come in and he's going to begin trying to lead America after this war, after World War II, after the Korean War. And when he takes over, there's a lot going on in our country. The first big thing is the baby boom. And the baby boom was an explosion of marriages and births following World War II. Over 50 million babies were born between 1945 and 1960. My dad actually falls inside of that by just a hair. I believe he was born in 58, maybe 58, 57, right in there. But essentially, you had all these people coming back from World War II, and you just had a spike in childbirth. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. People who are grateful that they were able to survive and they want to come back and start a family. You also had low-priced housing begin to pop up, and that was created by what we call, I think his name was John Levitt. Anyways, last name was Levitt, and they called all the places he built Levitt towns. Something like 17,000 low-priced family homes were built in Long Island, New York, and it's really going to be one of the first suburban areas that we really see pop up, at least the one that's recognized in history. Low interest rate mortgages, they were government insured and tax deductible. And essentially in one generation, a majority of middle class became suburbanites. Okay, and this Levitt town popped up right outside of the city where these people could live in this suburban area and then drive to the city. And especially with the advancing of the automobile because of the war, it's going to allow for people to expand and change their lives a little bit. Now, in 1955, the Soviet Union had created the Warsaw Pact. The pact united all communist countries under one banner. And the fear here was that communists were afraid of capitalism taking over Russia and all of its communist states, the same as the capitalists were afraid of communism taking over all the capitalist states. So basically, their response to the fact that, well, was the rest of the Allies, but the fact that a lot of these capitalistic countries were siding with America is Russia kind of tries to start forming its own little group. But this was the communist response to the formation of NATO, which was in response to the fear of communism spreading. It's just a lot of react to each other. Now, Eisenhower was president between 53 and 61. He was able to pass the 22nd Amendment, okay? Brown versus the Board of Education, CETO, which we'll talk about, the Suez Canal we'll talk about as well, the Eisenhower Doctrine, and the Race for Space. Now, the first thing we'll talk about, we're not going to go real in depth with this, the 22nd Amendment basically limited presidents to 2 terms. And this will be the first time that this has been passed, but this will be kind of this is kind of the way it is going forward. That's why after Obama served 2 terms, he was ineligible to be president any longer. Now, CETO was the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. All right, and it was intended to be the Southeast Asia version of NATO. At least that's the idea behind it. And they were trying to contain communism. Once again, it's a response to the Warsaw Pact and trying to keep communism from spreading. One of the main members was John Dole. You really don't need to know that name, but he was a huge advocate for the creation of CETO. And as Secretary of State to Dwight D. Eisenhower, he denounced the containment policies of Truman, said they were too passive. He said that Truman should have been more aggressive to keep Russia from spreading communism because they were an imminent threat. He even believed in a massive retaliation because he believed that we need to push Russia to the brink of a war because we had the nuclear weapons. We can push them back. We can force them to stop. The economics was bigger focus of massive retaliation because, if we're ramping up all of our military and all of those things towards a war, that's going to help our economy continue to flow. John Dole, like I said, was also a big component of CETO. And he had this statement: the ability to get to the verge without getting into the war is the necessary art. If you're scared to go to the brink, you are lost. He believed we needed to flirt with the idea of war because it was important to show our strength to keep communism from spreading. Now, the Suez Canal crisis. On May 14, 1948, Israel had proclaimed independence after a decision from the United Nations that they were going to be a country, and they gave them this part of land, this piece of land in the Mediterranean Sea. The problem is that that land is very disputed between the Jews and the Muslims. Uh, the Arab-Israeli wars began, and when Arabs were going to be forced off of this Israeli land, they feared the loss of oil access in the Middle East. The U.S. specifically feared that, but also these Arabs feared that they were going to lose their access to oil and that eventually they were going to get pushed out. This really kind of almost starts a lot of what you look at the terrorist issues and some of the things that have went on during the early 2000s. A lot of these things kind of begin during this time because the U.S. is heavily involved. The CIA backed a coup to remove the leader of Iran because they feared that with the Israel being given this land by the United Nations, that those Arab nations were going to view America as part of that and then stop supplying them oil. And so they placed Reza Pahlavi in place, who was close to the U.S. for 25 years. So essentially they got their guy, at least in Iran. Now, in 1956, Israel declared war on Egypt, and Eisenhower and Dulles feared the pressure on Egypt and the Middle East would drive them to the Soviet Union. So, if they went to a communist country and they got support, now you're going to have a bigger problem on your hands because now you've got communists controlling your major oil supply. The U.S. joined the United Nations in denouncing the war despite its supporting for Israel, and Israel agreed to a truce with Egypt shortly after. So essentially, it was kind of like Israel realized that the U.S. did not want this to go on, and they knew they weren't going to have the United States support, and so they gave up. All right, guys, that's all I have for you today in the vocabulary. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I will talk to you soon.